G. Edward, I want to start taking calls in the next segment and also get into solutions with you, but you've got the floor. Break down their system of crisis creation, what's currently happening with the carbon tax, the government health care, the banks. It's come out even in McClatchy News Service that Goldman Sachs imploded the housing market on purpose, engineered it to destroy their competition, to get the bailouts and hoard the money. Goldman Sachs, of course, is the inner group that pilots the Federal Reserve System, and that also holds the federal regulatory positions in almost every agency, 2, 3, 4 deep. And where we're going with this system, what the world is going to look like in a decade, 20 years, if they succeed from the research. So what they're doing currently, and then what the world will look like if they succeed. G. Edward Griffin, you've got the floor all the way out to the next break.
Well, that's quite a topic. As a matter of fact, I've started to put a series of seminars on the road, Alex, called A Crash Course on Money. And before I forget it, we just decided the other evening to come to Austin on December 12th. So we'll talk about that later. But anyway, the Crash Course on Money is a full-day seminar, and I devoted a lot of time to answering just the question that you've raised. Where are we going, and what can we do about it? Well, in a nutshell, anybody that listens to your program has got a pretty good idea. We're going to a complete command economy, where the free market, what's left of it today, will be completely dead. I'm not predicting that this must happen. I'm saying that if there are no changes, if we continue going in the direction that we're headed, we're going to reach where we're headed, that's all. And we're headed right toward a command economy. That's no different substantially than the command economy of the old Soviet Union or the Red China or or Nazi Germany. And in other words, prices will be completely controlled. Employment will be completely controlled. Your complete dependence for your food, your shelter, your health care, your education, everything that's important will be provided and regulated by the masters in Washington, D.C., and people will be grateful, or told they're supposed to be grateful, to be taken care of. And in return for that, of course, they must be very good boys and girls and do exactly as they're told. Otherwise, they'll be cut off, and they won't have that food, shelter, and health care and all of that sort of thing. It's a very dismal picture. It's a high-tech feudalism, and it's definitely in our future and not our distant future, I might say, if things continue as they are. So what can you do about that? Well, there's nothing you can do about it except to change the direction that we're headed. You can't just say, well, what should we invest in? That might help a little bit. It might get you a few weeks or months down the line with a little bit of independence. But when the jackboots show up and say, into the truck, that's the end of the line, investments or not. So we got to change the system. And, of course, I'm always talking about Freedom Force International when I start thinking about changing the system, recapturing the system. But how can you protect yourself in the meantime? There's a short-term view and a long-term view. People are naturally concerned about that short-term view. And, you've got a lot of your sponsors on your program that I think have excellent solutions for short-term survival, if you will. Sure, we ought to have food. We ought to have good drinking water. Ought to have power, electrical power at our disposal. We ought to have gold and silver, something that will be readily accepted by almost everybody when it comes time to replace the electronic money system that probably will be completely collapsed at one point. So, yeah, those are things you can do for the short term. But the long term, the only thing that will work is to recapture the system. And then we start, in the seminar, we'll be talking about this thing of revolution versus revolt. And that's quite an interesting topic because I don't think many people have considered the difference. There's a rising energy for resistance today. People are angry, and as that television, or that, I guess it's not television, it was a movie, I can't think of the name of it, Network, I guess it was. The guy says, we're mad as hell and we ain't going to take it no more, or whatever he says. Well, that's the kind of the mood of the American people. We're mad. We're not going to take it anymore. But the idea that you just get mad and not take it anymore is going to make a difference? No, they don't care about that. The elitists have been anticipating years in advance for some kind of an uprising. They've been building FEMA camps for that. They've been equipping the local police in crowd control, and they've been developing weapons specifically for demonstrators and crowds of people and rioters and so forth. They know it's coming, and in my opinion, I think they want it to come, which is a frightening thing, because I think they want people out making all of this ruckus so they can have a good excuse to institute martial law and round up everybody, including those who aren't even on the streets, people who maybe are sitting in their radio studios doing talk shows. And so I think they want that kind of violence. But one of the things we'll be talking about is the difference between a revolt and a revolution. Basically, it's this. Revolts are just a uprising of people with no leadership, no strategy, no goal, no organization, no funding, no communications, just a bunch of people that say, I've had it, and I'm not going to take it anymore. And they wind up in the streets with rocks and stones and sticks or whatever they've got. And it'd be like the Hungarian revolt back in the 60s. Revolts never work. They may be successful for a day or two, create a lot of euphoria on the part of the participants because they're able to face down established military control merely with their sheer numbers. But after a little while, it dissipates. It goes away. They don't have resources. They don't have food. They don't have water. They don't have leadership, communications, and all those things, and the revolt gradually just dissipates, and no revolt of history has ever been successful in the long run. Revolutions, on the other hand, often are successful, but that's because they're quite different from revolts. They have all of the things that revolts don't have. They do have leadership and strategy and financing and communications, and especially they have military training and military units already in place. It's quite different. And all you need to do is take a look at the American Revolution, and you can see immediately that that was not a revolt. That was a revolution. We had 13 governments that came together. They were complete governments. They had their leadership, they had taxes, they had courts, they had representation, they had military units, they had armories with ammunition, they had training, military training and discipline, and 13 governments came together and unified and stood up against the government of the Crown of England. Had they just been farmers with pitchforks or muskets, there's no way in the world they could have successfully stood up against King George. But they were organized, and so they really created a revolution. So now we look at today, and all these people running around say, well, it's about time to have a revolution. They have no idea what they're talking about. And if you listen to those people, I think it's going to be a great tragedy for the Americans who fall for it. Be one of the greatest bloodbaths of all history, I'm afraid.
Well, G. Edward, we see the provocateurs online with websites and commenting. We can track who they are. In many cases, it comes out later they were FBI informants. They're always calling for shooting and killing and war, and they always go around saying, Alex Jones is a coward. He's not calling for killing cops and military. And I say, that person's got to be a Fed or they'd be arrested. And then years later, it comes out they're all Feds on record in court. It's just unbelievable. That's why the federal government stages terror attacks like Oklahoma City and 9/11. They need to make themselves the victims. They need to have offensive attacks against themselves to have the illusion that they're not the aggressor, because in common sense humanity, people know that an aggressor is the person that is in the wrong. And so as we expand down this road, it's obvious. Anybody saying you're a coward, you're not calling for violence. You notice they're not marching out and carrying out the violence. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't defensively protect ourselves. And the Second Amendment is something that's been holding back the tyranny, because they know it would go badly for them if they go on the offensive against us. So the question for the controllers is, how do they go on the offensive against the people of the world without looking like the aggressors. And so that's why they use terrorism and the environment and all these systems that make the individual bad and that colors everyone as a potential bad guy. And the airports, TSA admits, that's training for nationwide on the streets and schools and at the colleges and at the hospitals and the shopping malls where we're all searched and randomly lined up on the side of the street and put through body scanners. England's about 5 years ahead of us, as you know, and they're doing the exact same thing. They are bringing in tyranny. They're saying parents have to have a license to have kids and be with them in public to prove they're not pedophiles. 20,000 homes with newborn babies have cameras in the homes watching them to make sure they're good parents, guilty until proven innocent. And when I ask you about their future operation, I've read their documents. I know what their future operation is if they win. I just wanted your perspective and view on that because they say